To find Sketchbook, go to the launcher. It should be on the first page. It's a red pencil tip. You can scroll through your launcher pages if you don't see it. Another way to find Sketchbook if you cannot find it on launcher is by going to Spotlight Search and typing in Sketchbook. The application should launch once you double click or press enter on Sketchbook. You're going to go to Image, Canvas Size, change the width and the height to 1080. Make sure you're on canvas size, not image size. Press OK. You're now working on a square canvas. I can pinch on my trackpad to zoom out or spread my thumb and index finger apart to zoom in. As long as you can see what you're doing, it doesn't matter to me how far zoomed in you are. Use two fingers to slide around to reposition your canvas within your workspace. In Sketchbook, to find the Dream Brush, which is my personal preferred brush, we're going to go to your brush libraries. You can absolutely use the default brushes that are set up. So for example, if I wanted to use this paintbrush, that works well enough for what I needed to do. So if I want to access the Dream Brush at the top of my Brushes panel, I'm going to click on Brush Library and scroll down until I find the cluster of brushes that is referred to as Designer. To add a brush to your default panel, you can simply click and drag. If you want to make an entire set of brushes your default, you can pin it to set that as your palette. If I do that, however, after I've already moved the Dream Brush, I would have to go back up to the basic and retrieve the Dream Brush from the basic set because that's where it went when I pinned it to this panel. On my Layers panel, I'm going to click the eyeball next to Background. I'm still on the active layer that is highlighted in blue. At the top of my screen, I'm going to grab my oval tool. My color is set to blue. I'm using the Dream Brush. I'm going to hold Option Shift and click and drag to create a perfect circle. Choose the Fill Bucket tool to fill your circle in. I can click closer to the edge or click again inside the circle to get rid of that little 1 pixel border between my initial circle and my filled circle. I can create a new layer, or I can simply lock the layer opacity of this layer by clicking the padlock on layer 1. I'm now going to draw mountains with a lighter blue. Because I've locked my layers transparency, the program will not let me paint outside of the circle, which helps me to keep my design inside of my circle as part of my requirements. I'm going to fill my mountains in with that same shade of blue. To add texture and visual interest to my mountains, I'm going to choose a slightly different shade of blue and create a shadow texture on my mountains. I'm drawing on the same layer here. Because my mountains don't have protected transparency, they're part of the circle, I have to be careful to stay on the mountain. For drawing the shadows on the mountain, I'm actually going to use the line tool that is located as part of the drawing styles menu. So I'm going to select the line, and if I use this tool, I can get a straight line every time. To save time, I'm going to create a couple of lines together, and you'll notice I'm on a separate layer. So I've made a new layer, layer 2, by clicking the plus sign at the top of my layers panel. I'm now going to use my lasso tool or my rectangular selection tool to select just those pixels because they're on a separate layer. Before moving the pixels, I have copied them. So once they were selected, I pressed Command C and then Command V to paste them. And then I'm just using my transform controls to duplicate them. Rather than cloning them onto the second mountain, I'm just drawing lines for that second mountain. If I select outside of my mountains on layer 1, I can quickly clip off the shadows that are on my other layers. To clip off the shadows that are overlapping the mountains, I'm just going to use my eraser tool. If you look closely at my layers as I'm working in this video, you can see that I'm putting my shadows on separate layers that it's easier to manipulate how they look in the end. If you forget to put your shadows on a separate layer and you are drawing these mountains, you can simply paint over them. Remember that if your layer 1 with your circle has the transparency locked, it will not let you erase. You have to paint over areas to fix any mistakes. To clip off the shadows that are outside of the circle and maintain that nice crisp circular edge, I'm going to go down to layer 1 and make it active. Choose my magic wand selection tool and click outside of the circle. I can now go up to my shadows layers and just click delete. Don't forget to leave your selection by pressing Command D when you're done. I'm merging my shadows down, so now everything is on one layer. I'm going to create my ground on a separate layer. I'm going to create a snowy scene, so I'm painting with white or a very light blue. I'm drawing across the front of the mountains on a separate layer. And I'm going to start outside of the circle and end outside of the circle. I can make my brush steadier by using steady stroke. You can also use stroke prediction up on the top menu panel. If you are choosing to paint all of this on the same layer, on layer 1, remember you can't erase, you have to paint over. I'm now painting all the way around the bottom of my circle, keeping my brush on my canvas. And I'm connecting the ends. This is important because if it's not connected, the fill bucket will try to fill the entire canvas. To clip the edges, I'm on layer 1, choosing my magic wand tool, clicking outside of the circle, going back to my new layer and pressing delete. Don't forget to press Command D to leave your selection. For the time being, I'm not going to merge my snow down. I'm going to make a new layer to make a tree. Just like with the shadows, I'm going to draw one tree and I'm going to duplicate the tree many times to fill my space. Remember that elements in the foreground should be taller, the midground should be medium-sized, and the distance or almost in the background should be quite small. After drawing my tree, I'm going to click on the dashed circle in the middle of the layer that has the tree on it. I might want to duplicate it multiple times, but I'm just going to do one at a time right now. So clicking in this dashed circle and duplicate layer. Now I can go to my transform tool and I can move it around using this puck. I have a white line that has followed me for some reason. I'm just going to switch to my eraser tool and erase it before switching back to my transform tools. On the transform puck, don't forget that whichever part is blue is your current action. So if I wanted to duplicate this tree again, I could use a selection tool and copy and paste, or I can simply go to the dashed circle in the middle of the layer, choose duplicate, and transform. So I can shrink the tree, I can make it larger. I don't know why I would pivot it, but I could certainly do that. I'm going to build a cluster of tree clones that I can then clone as a line to fill in a tree line that I may eventually place under the snow or I may leave on top of the snow, because as you look across a field, you rarely see the trees ending below the snow completely, but I'll make that choice once I'm done. So I'm just cloning a bunch of trees together, having them overlap, making them slightly different sizes. And I think 4 is going to be the magic number. So you can see in my layers panel, I'm rearranging and looking closely at what my layers are doing. And then I'm going to merge just the 4 trees together. So that dash circle, merge down, merge down, merge down. And that tiny thumbnail, which is the little picture of what's on the layer, helps me to identify quickly what is on my layer. So now I'm just duplicating that layer and cloning it across the edge of my snow in front of the mountains. I did end up putting my trees behind my snow. I'm going to go down to my layer 1, use my magic wand to select outside of the circle, go back to my tree line and press delete to clip off the edges of those trees. Don't forget to press Command D when you're done. I'm going to make the sky a slightly darker shade of blue, so it's going to look like it's at night. You can make yours any time of day. Using my fill bucket, I'm on layer 1 again with my circle, and you can simply just click to fill it, and it's only going to fill in the sky. I've made a new layer directly above layer 1. I'm going to paint stars. Again, you don't have to paint exactly what I'm painting, but it does teach you different techniques. I'm going to find a brush or a pen that I can turn into stars, and I think the ballpoint pen that's part of the basic set might actually be my best bet. So I'm in my brush library. I've selected just the regular old ballpoint pen after looking at the other brushes. I'm going to go to the advanced panel. I'm going to change how far apart the individual stamp is by clicking and dragging the spacing to the right. Under randomness, I'm going to change the size randomness, and the opacity randomness, and the flow randomness. How much you change those is really up to you. I'm also going to fiddle around with the spacing. And I can see in that properties window, it was giving me a little preview. I'm going to switch to white. And if I go back to my ballpoint pen settings, I'm going to change the type from standard to glow, which is in the properties, not the brush library. Now I can click and drag, and it's creating a random scattering of brushes. I can make them bigger or smaller by using my left or right bracket keys next to the letter P on my keyboard, or I can use that puck, or I can go into the brush properties. I'm just going to fill the entire night sky with stars. I'm going to make a new layer above my stars, and I'm going to paint an aurora. So I'm going to use a lime green, and I'm going to use one of those more painter paintbrushes. So it's going to behave a lot like an actual paintbrush in real life. You can use whichever one you would like, fiddling around with the size and the opacity and all of that. I'm using one of the brushes from the designer set, the synthetic taper. You can play around with the size randomness and the flow if you want to. You can also play around with the strength and the flow, and definitely play around with how big of an aurora do you want if you are choosing to paint an aurora. I'm just going to paint strokes going down. The northern lights kind of look like a curtain going across the sky. While you're making these landscapes, you can absolutely be looking at photographs of actual landscapes to give you an idea of what you can include in your design. I'm going to switch to a pink and play around with the flow settings a little bit, painting downstrokes that overlap the green curtain that I have. I can also brush up into the green and it's mixing. If I were to make another pass over this pink, it would make it very slightly more intense and more opaque. I'm going to switch to a blending brush that I know this program has. I'm going to blend these colors together. There are several kinds of blending brushes. I'm going to choose just the smudge flat bristle brush number 3. And I'm going to smudge down from the top to create that kind of spiky light effect that you get with the aurora. Maybe I'll make my brush a little bit bigger, or I'll make the strength a little bit lower. Remember, because you can undo using that back red arrow or using Command Z, you can really play around with the tools until you get the desired effect. And I am creating my aurora on a separate layer. Painting all on the same layer, on layer 1, because the transparency is locked. Remember, you have to be super careful about not having things overlap, because then you have to paint over them to fix them. So for example, if I had painted this on layer 1, my aurora is now overlapping the mountains, which is not a thing that happens, so I'd have to paint that mountain over again. Okay, so on my layers, I'm going to go down to layer 1. I'm going to grab my magic wand tool, click outside of the circle. Oh, sorry, I clicked inside the sky, inverted my selection, and then pressed delete, because that allowed me to clean up the mountains too. You can slow that down and go back and watch that again if that was too fast. I can merge down. I don't want to merge all. At this point, I can change the blending mode at the top of my layers panel, so how the colors on my aurora layer interact with the colors underneath it. You don't have to do this. You can absolutely leave it as normal. I do like overlay. Oops. I don't want to make a selection. I can get a little bit more fancy and make a new layer above my snow layer but under my trees. I've selected a watercolory type brush and I'm going to paint some shadows for my trees. You can really play around with what kind of style you would like to use in this landscape painting based on the tools that you have in your program and your own sense of aesthetics and style preferences. So you can make this more of like a Bob Ross style painting, or you can make it a very crisp, very stylized, kind of like sticker design almost. It's up to you. Done. Go to File, Save. You're going to put this file on your desktop, not in your pictures. You're going to give it the standard file naming format. So 2025, your first initial last name, your homeroom teacher's last name, and then landscape painting, and upload it to Google Classroom, please. Because the file is now done, you can change the format to PNG and click Save. Click OK when this message pops up. If you accidentally save it as a JPEG, it's not the end of the world.